Have you ever noticed something very strange about life? Many people say they want to change. They want a better life, a better job, a stronger version of themselves. But years go by, and their life looks almost exactly the same. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunities, but because they are trapped in a very subtle trap, the trap of familiar comfort. You see, change always makes people uncomfortable. It forces you to step into the unknown, to try new things, to accept that you might fail, and because of that, many people choose an easier path. They choose to stay where things feel familiar, stay with their old habits, stay with the life they already know. They think that is safety. But here is something very few people realize. Staying the same also has a price. Staying the same means your dreams slowly become smaller. Staying the same means your potential slowly gets forgotten. Staying the same means one day you look back at your life and ask yourself, could I have done more? And that is a very heavy question to carry for the rest of your life. Because the truth is this, change is uncomfortable, but being stuck hurts even more. You cannot avoid discomfort in life. You can only choose which kind of discomfort you are willing to accept, the discomfort of growth or the discomfort of regret. In today's video, I want to share with you 12 powerful lessons about change things most people only realize when it is already too late. These lessons will help you understand why people often stay stuck for many years, why change always comes with resistance, and how one right decision can change your entire life. And stay with me until the end of the video, because lesson number 11 might be the moment that makes you see your life in a completely different way. Lesson 1. Comfort is a hidden trap. There is something very interesting I realized after many years of observing people. Most people are not actually afraid of failure. What they are truly afraid of is the discomfort of change. You see, the human brain has a very strong tendency. It always looks for the easiest path, the familiar path, the path with the least risk, the path with the least pressure. And that sounds reasonable. But sometimes, that easy path becomes the biggest trap in your life. I remember talking to a man many years ago. He had a stable job. The salary was not very high, but it was enough to live. He told me, I know I could do more. I know I have the ability to build something bigger, but I do not want to trade my current stability. It sounded very reasonable. But a few years later, I met him again. The job was the same. The income was the same. The life was the same. But one thing had changed. His enthusiasm was gone. You see, comfort is not always good. Sometimes it is like a very soft couch. At first, you just sit down to rest for a while, but then you start staying longer. And before you realize what is happening, you have become too comfortable sitting still. Many people live their entire lives this way. They do not hate their life, but they are not truly proud of it either. They are not miserable enough to change, but not happy enough to feel fulfilled. And that is where potential begins to slowly die. You see, comfort has a very dangerous attraction. It makes you believe everything is fine. You tell yourself, I will change later. I will start when the timing is better. I just need a little more time. But life has a very interesting rule. What you postpone today often becomes what you regret tomorrow. I have met many intelligent people. They have talent. They have ideas. They have potential. But they still live a life smaller than their real ability. Not because they cannot change, but because they have become too comfortable. And when comfort becomes a habit, it starts to look like safety. But remember this, familiar does not mean safe. A familiar job that does not help you grow can trap you for many years. A familiar habit that is pulling you down can quietly destroy your future. A familiar life without purpose can make you wake up 10 years later and ask, what did I do with my life? So I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself a very simple question. Are you choosing comfort or are you choosing growth? Because these two paths rarely go together. Growth usually begins with a very uncomfortable feeling. You have to learn something new. You have to try something new. You have to accept that you are not good yet. But that is exactly where life begins to change. And here is the interesting part. The successful people I have met are not people who enjoy difficulty. They are simply people who understand one very simple truth. Comfort today can become regret tomorrow. So they choose the harder path, not because it is easy, but because they know that on the other side of discomfort is growth. And in the next lesson, I want to tell you something many people do not realize. Staying the same is also a decision, and sometimes it is the most dangerous decision a person can make. Lesson 2, staying the same is still a decision, There is a very common misunderstanding that I have seen during many years of working with people. Many people believe that if they do not make a decision, then their life is simply on pause. They think they are just waiting for a better moment, waiting for a better opportunity, waiting until they feel more ready. But here is something most people do not realize. Staying the same is not a neutral state. Staying the same is also a decision. You see, life does not stand still. The world is still changing. Skills are still changing. Opportunities are still changing. And while you think you are just pausing, your life is still moving in some direction. I once met a young man who told me, "I think I will start taking my career more seriously, but not right now." He wanted to learn new skills, wanted to start his own project, wanted to improve his life, but he always said, "I will do that next year." 1 year passed, then another year. And when I met him again a few years later, he was still saying the same sentence. "I just need a little more time." You see, the problem was not that he lacked ability. The problem was that every time he postponed, he was unknowingly making a decision, the decision to keep his current life exactly the same. And the most dangerous thing about this decision is that it is very quiet. It does not create a big shock. It does not create an obvious failure. Instead, it works in a very silent way. Today looks like yesterday. This week looks like last week. This year looks like last year. And then one day, you look back and realize that many years have passed. No big progress. No big change. Just a long chain of small decisions. I will start later. I will do that later. This is not the right time. But life does not wait. Opportunities do not wait. And your potential does not wait either. If you do not use it, it will begin to fade over time. I have seen this happen in many people's careers. At first they have motivation, they have dreams, they have energy, but after a few years living inside the comfort zone, they begin lowering their standards. Not because they want to, but because they have become used to staying the same. You see, when you stay the same for too long, something dangerous begins to happen. You start to believe, maybe this is all I can do, not because it is true, but because you have repeated the same life for too long. But I want you to remember something very important. Every day you wake up, you are making a decision. You can decide to keep living like yesterday, or you can decide to start changing one small thing. You do not have to change your entire life in one day, but you must start moving. Because the moment you start taking action, something interesting happens. You begin to feel that you are in control of your life. You begin to feel that the future is not something that happens to you. It is something you are building every single day. So I want to ask you a very direct question. Are you actively building your life, or are you unconsciously accepting your current life? Because whether you realize it or not, staying the same is also a decision. And in the next lesson, I want to talk about something most people misunderstand. When life becomes difficult, when things begin to create resistance, many people think that is a sign to stop. But in many cases, that resistance is actually a sign that you are beginning to grow. Lesson 3, growth always feels like resistance. There is something I wish more people understood earlier in life. Growth rarely feels easy. In fact, most of the time it feels quite uncomfortable. You see, when you start doing something new, almost everything inside you will resist. You want to wake up earlier, but the bed suddenly feels warmer than ever. You want to start a new habit, but your brain constantly finds reasons to procrastinate. You want to try a new path in your career, but the fear of failure begins to appear. And many people, when they feel this, immediately conclude, maybe this is not for me. But I want you to think about a very simple image. Imagine you walk into the gym for the first time after many months without training. You pick up a dumbbell. The first few times it feels quite heavy. Your muscles begin to shake. Your breathing becomes faster. You feel resistance, but think about what is actually happening. That resistance is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign your muscles are starting to grow. If the weight is too light, your muscles will not change. If everything is always easy, your body will not need to adapt. And life works according to the same principle. Every time you raise your standards, you will feel pressure. When you start learning a new skill, you will feel awkward. When you step outside your comfort zone, you will feel uncertain. That is not a sign to stop. That is a sign you are entering the growth zone. I have met many people with great potential. They are intelligent. They are capable. They have amazing ideas. But they stop too early. The moment things become a little harder, they return to what feels familiar, and they call that realism. But sometimes, it is simply fear disguised as logic. You see, our brain is designed to protect us from danger. But sometimes it also tries to protect us from growth, because growth always comes with the unknown, and the unknown makes people uncomfortable. But remember this, you cannot become stronger by avoiding pressure. You cannot become more confident by avoiding challenges. You cannot build a bigger life by always choosing the easiest path. I have observed this for many years. The people who truly change their lives are not people who never feel fear. They feel fear too. They feel doubt too. They feel difficulty too. But they understand something important. Resistance often appears right before you step into a stronger version of yourself. So the next time you feel uncomfortable starting something new, when you feel pressure while learning a new skill, when you feel resistance while raising your standards, do not immediately see it as a sign of failure. See it as a signal that you are no longer living inside the comfort zone. You are stepping into the growth zone. And here is the interesting part. If you stay consistent long enough, what once felt difficult will become normal. Not because the challenge disappears, but because you have become stronger. And in the next lesson, I want to tell you about a very dangerous misunderstanding. Many people believe that if something is familiar, then it must be safe. But sometimes, the most familiar thing in your life is exactly what is keeping you stuck. Lesson 4, familiar does not mean safe. There is a very common mistake that I have seen repeated in the lives of many people. They confuse two completely different things, familiar and safe. You see, people have a very natural tendency. We feel comfortable with what we are used to, a familiar job, a familiar habit, a familiar life. Even when those things are not truly good for us, they still bring a sense of comfort, because we know what will happen. We know what tomorrow will look like. We know what we will do. We know how everything works. And because of that, our brain starts calling it safety. But think carefully for a moment. A job where you have not learned anything new for many years, is that really safe? A habit that is slowly destroying your health, is that really safe? A life without growth, is that really a good place to stay in for the long term? I have met many people who told me they did not want to change because they were afraid of risk. They said, "At least I know where I am. It sounds reasonable." But sometimes, knowing that tomorrow will look exactly like today is actually a dangerous sign. Because if your today is not bringing you closer to the life you want, then repeating that day hundreds of times will not make things better. It will only trap you more deeply. Imagine that you are standing on a boat that is slowly sinking. The water is not rushing in too fast. Everything still looks fairly fine. You stand there and say, "At least I know this boat." But being familiar with that boat does not make it any less dangerous. In fact, the most dangerous thing about situations like that is that they happen very slowly. There is no loud warning. There is no sudden shock. There is only a series of identical days. You delay learning a new skill. You delay improving your health. You delay pursuing what you truly want to do. And every time, you tell yourself, "I will do that later." But later has a very strange habit. It usually never comes. You see, familiarity can make you feel peaceful in the short term. But if that familiarity is not helping you grow, it can quietly steal years from your life. I have seen very talented people stay in jobs that do not fit them for 10 years. Not because they could not change, but because with every year that passed, changing started to feel a little harder. The habit became stronger. The confidence became weaker. And the idea that they could start over began to fade. That is how familiarity keeps people stuck. Not through pressure, but through false comfort. So I want you to ask yourself a very direct question. Is there something in your life that you are holding on to just because it is familiar? A job? A habit? A way of thinking? Because sometimes the first step to changing your life is not finding something new. It is looking directly at what is familiar and keeping you back. And when you begin to realize that, you also begin to understand an important truth. Familiarity is not always safety. Sometimes it is simply a cage made of old habits. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about something that most people only realize when it is already too late. Many people do not fail because they set goals that are too big. They fail because small delays repeated every day eventually turn into great regrets in life. Lesson 5, small delays become long regrets. There is something very interesting that I realized after many years of observing people's lives. Most major regrets in life do not begin with big decisions. They begin with very small delays. One day you say, "I will start later." 1 week you say, "I just need a little more time." 1 year you say, "Maybe now is not the right time." and before you realize what is happening, many years have passed. You see, life has a very interesting rule. The small things you delay today usually do not cause immediate consequences. If you miss one workout, nothing major happens. If you delay learning a new skill, nothing changes right away. If you keep doing work that you do not love, your tomorrow still looks like today. And that is exactly what makes delay so dangerous. It does not create a big shock. It just quietly repeats itself. I once spoke with a middle-aged man many years ago. He told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "I always thought I had plenty of time. When he was young, he wanted to start a business. But he said, I will do that after I become more stable. Later, he wanted to learn new skills. But he said, maybe next year will be better." Then he wanted to change his life. But by then, many years had passed. And when he looked back, what he regretted most was not the times he failed. What he regretted most was the times he never tried. You see, failure is rarely what hurts people the most. What hurts them the most is the question, what if I had tried? Because when you try and fail, you still learn something. You become stronger. You become wiser. You understand life more clearly. But when you do not try, you learn nothing at all. You only carry a question mark. And that question mark can stay with you for many years. I have seen this happen to many intelligent people. They have ideas. They have ability. They have opportunities. But they are always waiting for a perfect time. And do you know what is interesting? The perfect time rarely appears. Life is always busy. There is always pressure. There is always a reason to delay. If you wait until everything is perfect, you may wait your whole life. The people who truly change their lives understand one very simple thing. They do not wait for the perfect time. They start when things are still imperfect. They start when they still have doubts. They start when they are still afraid. Not because they are certain everything will work out, but because they understand an important truth. A small action today is always better than great regrets tomorrow. So I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself a very direct question. Is there something in your life that you have delayed for too long? A goal? A decision? A change? Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and a better life is not talent. It is not opportunity. It is just one small step that you have not been ready to take. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about something that many people misunderstand. Many people believe they need clarity before they act. But in reality, clarity often appears only after you begin to act. Lesson 6. Action creates clarity. There is something I realized after many years of observing how people make decisions. Many people believe they need clarity before they begin to act. They tell themselves, I will start when I am more certain. I will act when I understand the path clearly. I just need a little more time to think. It sounds reasonable. But in reality, life rarely works that way. Because clarity does not always come before action. Many times it only appears after you begin moving. Imagine that you are walking on a road in the dark. You are holding a small flashlight. Its light does not illuminate the entire long road ahead. It only lights up the first few steps. If you stand still and wait until the whole road lights up, you may stand there forever. But if you take one step, the light will move with you. You take another step, and another part of the road appears. And that is exactly how life works. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need to start walking. I have met many people with great ideas. They have plans. They have vision. They have very intelligent thoughts. But they still remain stuck, not because they lack ability, but because they spend too much time thinking and not acting. They analyze every possibility. They weigh every risk. They wait for every condition to become perfect. And while they are thinking, analyzing, and waiting, other people have already started taking action. Not because they are more certain, but because they understand one very important thing. Action creates clarity. When you begin doing something, you begin learning. You see what works, you see what does not. You adjust, you adapt, and step by step, the path becomes clearer. I remember a young person once asked me, how do I know if I am going in the right direction? I told him something very simple. You will not know for sure at the beginning, but if you start taking action, you will soon know what is not the right path, and that alone is already progress. Because with every step you try, you eliminate one direction that does not fit, and little by little, the right path begins to appear. But if you never begin, you will never learn that. You will only stand there with questions. Questions that only action can answer. Another interesting thing happens when you begin taking action. Your confidence starts to grow. Not because everything becomes easier, but because you begin proving to yourself that you can move, Even if your steps are small, even if they are not perfect, you are still moving forward, and that changes the way you see yourself. You no longer feel like someone waiting for life to change. You begin to feel like someone creating change. So if you are waiting for a perfect moment, a perfect plan, or a perfect feeling of certainty, I want you to remember one thing. Clarity rarely comes before action. It comes after you begin, after the first step, after the first effort, after the first decision. And as you keep moving, something very interesting will begin to happen. Small steps begin to connect with each other. They create a very strong force in life, a force that I call momentum. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about something most people underestimate. Momentum, the power of small steps repeated every day. Lesson 7, momentum is built one step at a time. There is something I have learned after many years of observing successful people. The big turning points in their lives rarely begin with a huge action. They usually begin with a very small step, a small decision, a small action, a small habit. But what makes those small steps powerful is not their size. It is their repetition. You see, life has a very interesting rule. Small actions, when repeated long enough, begin to create a force that I call momentum. Momentum is like pushing a car that is standing still. At first, it is very heavy. You have to use a lot of force just to make it move a little. But once the car starts rolling, everything becomes easier. Each next push requires less effort. And before you realize it, the car has started moving on its own with its own speed. Life works the same way. The first step is usually the hardest step. Starting to exercise after months of delay, starting to learn a new skill, starting to change a bad habit. The first steps always feel heavy. You feel a lack of motivation. You feel a lack of energy. You feel like everything is moving too slowly. And that is when many people quit, not because they do not have ability, but because they did not stay long enough for momentum to begin forming. I have seen this happen in many areas of life. In health, a person starts working out. The first week feels very hard, but after a few weeks, the body begins to adapt. After a few months, exercise becomes a natural part of life. In career, a person starts learning a new skill. At first, everything is very slow. They make mistakes. They feel like they are making very little progress. But if they keep going, one day they realize that what once felt very difficult has now become very normal. That is the power of momentum. It does not appear immediately. It is built from small actions repeated every day. But once momentum starts working, it begins to work for you. Good habits become easier. Right decisions become more natural. Your confidence begins to grow, not because life becomes perfect, but because you begin to see evidence that change is possible. And here's the interesting part. Momentum does not only exist in a positive direction, it also exists in a negative direction. If you delay a good habit today, it will be easier to delay it tomorrow. If you ignore a goal today, ignoring it tomorrow will feel more natural. That is how people slowly fall into a stuck state. Not because of one big wrong decision, but because many small decisions are repeated in the same direction. So the real question is not, are you moving fast enough? The real question is, are you moving in the right direction every day? Because if you keep moving, even just a little every day, momentum will eventually begin to appear. And when that happens, life begins to change faster than you think. But for momentum to become truly sustainable, there is one factor even more important than motivation. It is the way you see yourself. Because when a person changes the way they see themselves, their actions also begin to change. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about a very powerful principle. Your identity, the way you see yourself, is the foundation of discipline and lasting change. Lesson 8, your identity determines your discipline. There is something very interesting that I realized after many years of working with people. Many people try to change their lives by changing their goals. They say, I want to make more money. I want to become healthier. I want to become more successful. Those goals are not wrong, but they are often not where real change truly begins. Real change begins in a much deeper place. It begins with your identity. You see, people have a very strong tendency. We usually act in ways that match the way we see ourselves. If you believe you are an undisciplined person, you will easily skip good habits. If you believe you are someone who procrastinates, you will always find reasons to do things later. But when the way you see yourself changes, your actions also begin to change. I have seen this happen many times. A person tells me they want to start exercising. They try for a few weeks, but then they quit. Not because exercise is impossible, but because deep inside they still believe I am not a disciplined person. And when you carry that belief, every time things become difficult, your brain will say, see, this is not who you are. But imagine something different. Imagine you begin telling yourself, I am someone who takes care of my health. Even if you start with only small steps, one walk, one better meal, one better habit, each small action begins reinforcing a new identity. You are no longer just someone trying to change. You begin becoming someone living by a new standard. That is a huge difference. Because when an action is tied to your identity, it is no longer something you have to force yourself to do. It becomes something that matches who you are. I have seen this happen in many people's careers. A person says, I want to become an entrepreneur, but they still think and act like someone who is only trying. And because of that, when difficulty appears, they quit easily. But when a person truly decides, I am someone who builds businesses, everything starts to change. They learn more. They persist more. They handle pressure better, not because they become stronger immediately, but because their identity has changed. You see, identity is like a filter. It affects the way you make decisions every day. You wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what would a person like me do today? If you believe you are a disciplined person, it becomes easier to keep promises to yourself. If you believe you are someone who does not quit, you will keep going even when things become difficult. That is why small changes repeated every day matter so much. They do not just change your results. They begin to change the way you see yourself. And when your identity changes, discipline is no longer a battle. It becomes a natural part of life. But there is one very important thing you need to understand. Identity is not built from words. It is built from repeated actions. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you are reinforcing a stronger version of yourself. And step by step, you begin becoming the person you once thought you could never become. But even when identity starts to change, there is still one factor that can destroy many people's discipline. It is when they let emotions control their decisions. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about a very important truth. Emotions can be very powerful, but they are rarely good leaders for your life. Lesson 9. Emotions are terrible leaders. There is something I realized after many years of observing the way people live and work. Many people let emotions decide their lives. If they feel motivated, they work hard. If they feel excited, they pursue their goals. But if they feel tired, or discouraged, or unmotivated, everything starts to stop. You see, emotions have a very interesting characteristic. They change constantly. One day you feel full of energy. The next day you may feel tired. One day you feel very confident. The next day you may begin doubting yourself. If you let emotions decide your actions, your life will always lack stability. You start very strong, then you slow down, then you stop, and then a few weeks later you start all over again. I have seen this happen to many people. They start a new habit. The first week is great. They are full of motivation. They are very disciplined. They feel like they are changing, but then one day they wake up and do not feel like doing it. Just one day. They say, I will just rest today. The next day they say again, I will start again next week. And before they realize what is happening, that habit is gone. Not because it did not work, but because emotions were leading their decisions. But the people who truly change their lives understand something very important. Emotions are not good leaders. Emotions can talk to you. They can influence you, but they should not be the final decision maker. Successful people are not always motivated. In fact, many days they feel tired too. They feel doubt too. They have days when they do not want to work too, but they still continue. Not because they always feel amazing, but because they made a decision earlier. They decided that they are people who do not quit. They decided that they will keep their standards. And once that decision is made, emotions are no longer controlling their lives. Imagine a ship crossing the ocean. If that ship changes direction every time the wind changes, it will never reach its destination. But if the ship has a clear compass, it can go through strong winds, big waves, and bad weather. In the end, it will still arrive where it needs to go. In your life, that compass is your decision. The decision about what kind of person you want to become. The decision about the standards you will live by. The decision about the life you are building. When you have that decision, emotions will still appear. You will still have difficult days. You will still have moments when you want to quit. But those emotions no longer decide your actions. You keep going. You keep your promises to yourself. And day by day, you build a stronger life. But there is something else that many people do not realize. Sometimes what is truly keeping them stuck is not emotion. It is prolonged hesitation. Hesitation makes them overthink. Hesitation makes them delay action. And little by little, hesitation begins to steal their energy and potential. So, in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about a silent destroyer in many people's lives. Indecision, the thing that can quietly destroy your potential over time. Lesson 10, indecision quietly destroys potential. There is a very silent destroyer in many people's lives. It is not loud. It does not create major failures right away. But over time, it can steal many opportunities, a lot of energy, and a lot of potential. That destroyer is indecision. You see, many people do not actually fail because they lack ability. They fail because they do not decide soon enough. They think too much. They wait too much. They wait for a perfect feeling of certainty before they act. And while they are thinking, time keeps moving. I have met many intelligent people. They have great ideas. They have good plans. They have the ability to accomplish big things. But every day begins with one question. Is this really the right decision? And that question repeats every day. They wake up intending to begin, but then they think a little more. They analyze a little more. They wait a little more. And before they realize what has happened, that day is gone. No progress. No action. Just one more day of indecision. You see, indecision works in a very subtle way. It makes you feel like you are doing the right thing. You tell yourself that you are being careful. You are thinking things through. You are preparing better. But many times, that is just another form of delaying action. I learned a very important lesson about this. The people who truly go far in life are not the ones who always make perfect decisions. They are the ones who decide faster. Not recklessly, but decisively. They understand that most decisions in life are not permanent decisions. If one path does not work, they adjust. If one plan does not fit, they change it. But they do not stand still for too long, because every day you live in indecision, you are spending your mental energy. You wake up and argue with yourself. You ask yourself what you should do. You ask yourself whether you are capable enough. And that conversation keeps happening in your head. That is exhausting. But when you make a clear decision, something interesting happens. The noise in your head begins to disappear. You no longer argue with yourself. You no longer ask, should I do this? You simply ask, what would the person I have decided to become do today? And that question is much simpler. You act. You move forward. You learn. You adjust. But you no longer stand still. I have seen people completely change their lives because of one thing. They finally made a clear decision. A decision about what kind of person they would become. A decision about the life they would build. And once that decision was made, many things started to change. Not because life became easier, but because they were no longer wasting energy on indecision. But there is a moment even more powerful than overcoming hesitation. It is the moment when a person finally says to themselves, I have decided, not hoping, not trying, not waiting to see what happens, deciding. And in the next lesson, I want to talk to you about the moment that can change the entire direction of your life. The moment when everything begins to change, the instant you truly decide. Lesson 11, the moment you decide, everything changes. There is a very special moment in every person's life. It is not the moment you read another book. It is not when you listen to an inspiring speech. And it is not when you create a new plan. The moment that truly changes your life is when you make a clear decision. You see, many people live in a state that I call half deciding. They say they want to change. They say they want to succeed. They say they want to become a better version of themselves. But deep inside, they still leave themselves an escape route. They say, I will try. I will see how things go. If it does not work, I will do something else. Those statements sound reasonable, but they contain a very big problem. They are not real decisions. A real decision is not a desire. It is not a hope. It is a clear line. It is when you say to yourself, this is the person I am going to become. And from that moment, you begin living by that standard. You see, when a person truly decides, something interesting begins to happen. The ambiguity in their life begins to disappear. Before, they would often ask themselves, should I do this? Should I try? Maybe I should wait longer. But after the decision is made, those questions are no longer necessary. Because the only question left is, what would the person I have decided to become do right now? That question is simple, but it is very powerful. If you have decided that you are a disciplined person, you act like a disciplined person. If you have decided that you are someone who does not quit, you keep going even when things become difficult. Not because you always feel strong, but because your decision is stronger than your emotions. I have seen this happen in many people's lives. Before they truly decided, their life was like a boat drifting at sea. Whichever way the wind blew, they went that way. If they felt motivated, they worked hard. If they felt tired, they stopped. But when they truly decided, that boat had a strong anchor. The winds still exist. The difficult days still appear. But they are no longer carried away by every small gust of wind. They become stable. And that stability is something many people lack in life. Not because they lack ability, but because they have never truly decided who they are. You see, many people wait for confidence before they act. But in reality, confidence often appears after you decide. Because when you decide and begin acting according to that decision, every time you keep a promise to yourself, you become stronger. Little by little, you begin to trust yourself. And that trust begins to change the way you walk through life. But there is one final thing I want you to understand. A decision only truly has power when you hold on to it over time, because life will test you. It will bring difficult days, moments of doubt, pressures that make you want to return to the old path. And it is in those moments that your decision will be tested. So in the final lesson, I want to talk to you about the thing that turns a decision into a completely new life. Consistency, the power of holding your standard every day. Lesson 12. Consistency builds an unshakable life. After everything we have talked about in this video, there is one final principle I want you to remember. Because without this principle, every decision, every plan, and every source of motivation can eventually disappear. That principle is consistency. You see, many people have moments of inspiration in life. They watch a motivational video, they read a great book, they listen to a speech that makes them feel full of energy. In that moment, they decide that their life is going to change. They make plans, they set goals, they feel ready to begin a new chapter. But then a few days later, life returns to its familiar rhythm. Work gets busy, pressure appears, fatigue begins to build up, and little by little, that initial motivation begins to fade. Not because they are not serious, but because they lack one very important thing: long-term consistency. You see, success rarely comes from one single great action. It comes from small actions repeated over a long period of time. One day you improve yourself a little. The next day you continue. The day after that you take another step forward. Those steps may look very small. Sometimes you may even feel like you are not making much progress. But over time, those small steps begin to accumulate. A good habit begins to form. A new skill begins to grow. A stronger version of yourself begins to appear. I have seen this happen in many people's lives. The people who truly change their lives are not the people who are always motivated. They also have tired days. They also have moments of doubt. But they keep going, not because everything is always easy, but because they understand that consistency matters more than emotion. They do not ask, "Do I feel motivated today?" They ask, "What kind of person have I decided to become?" And then they act according to that decision, day after day, week after week, year after year. And little by little, their life begins to change. You see, consistency has a very special power. It turns small actions into big results. It turns small habits into major changes. And over time, it builds something that very few people have: trust in yourself. You begin to know that when you say you are going to do something, you really will do it. You no longer doubt yourself. You no longer live according to temporary emotions. You live by your standards. And that is when life begins to become solid. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you become more stable. You are no longer carried away by every small wind in life. You have a direction. You have a standard. You have a path. So if there is one thing I want you to remember from today's video, it is this: you do not need to change your entire life in one day. You only need to begin with one small step, then repeat that step tomorrow. And the day after that too. Because when you keep moving forward little by little, your life will begin to change in ways you could not have imagined before. And now I want to ask you a question. Out of the 12 lessons today, which lesson touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments section. If you found this video helpful, please hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next lessons. And remember one thing that I have always believed: if you discipline yourself to do what is easy, your life will be hard. But if you discipline yourself to do what is hard, your life will be easy. You and I both have a very special gift. That is today. Use it wisely. I will see you again in the next video.